Good morning. I'm Haylie Shipp with your Farm and Ranch News, and this morning we're talking with Ann Miller. Now, Ann is the Executive Director for the Pork Producers Council, both in Montana and in Wyoming. And of course, we did have that huge piece out last week with Couric talking about the use of antibiotics in agriculture. She was really focusing in on the use of antibiotics in the pork industry and in a subtherapeutic way, in the way that you're just feeding a little bit to them constantly. And have you here on the show today, just why don't you give me the initial reaction from the pork industry after that piece did air?
Sure. I think it's really important for the consumer to know a few more facts about the industry, especially for Montana and Wyoming. First of all the antibiotics that are used on the farm are FDA approved, and so they undergo a review process before they're even allowed on farm. And then we are allowed to use those drugs either for ill pigs, pigs that are susceptible to disease, in cases where we're trying to stop the disease from spreading further, and in some cases for nutritional efficiency. And so those are all the reasons that a producer would bring antibiotics into the picture. Another point that we do want to make it really clear to the consumer group out there is that the factory farms that are referred to so often nowadays, for Montana, those consist of family farms. As well as in Wyoming, we have a lot of families that are relying on that agricultural income to support the parents, the kids, start the college fund, things like that. And so it's really important to keep that in mind when you're talking about these larger operations, say 300 sows, 450 sows, because it does affect people that support your local communities.
All right, thanks again. That is Ann Miller. She is with the Montana Pork Producers Council and the Wyoming Pork Producers Council, talking about that antibiotics piece that did air last week on the CBS Evening News with Couric, putting a very negative picture towards the use of antibiotics in those livestock. Now these messages.
My husband and I, we don't always agree on decorating decisions, but he did make a huge improvement upstairs in the attic. Just by adding insulation, he saved us $240 last year on our heating and cooling. It's a work in progress. What can you do? Find out at togetherwesave.com.
Energy saving tips brought to you by Tri-State and your local Touchstone Energy cooperatives, always looking out for you.
Tire-Rama. We're more than just a tire store. That's why we sponsor the Montana Special Olympics. For these talented athletes, it's more than just the athletic competition. It's the determination, drive, and discipline. And in the end, just like at Tire-Rama, it's about the relationships. This year, be a fan and support Montana Special Olympics by purchasing a raffle ticket at any Tire-Rama to win a 2010 Chevy Silverado pickup. Tire-Rama, more than just a tire.
Welcome back to your Farm and Ranch News. Again, we're talking with Ann Miller, and we're talking about the use of antibiotics in the pork industry. Now, part two of that CBS Evening News piece with Couric did talk about the use of antibiotics and how it's changed in Denmark now that they aren't feeding it as a feed additive. But you said that there's some interesting things that have happened in Denmark since then.
Absolutely. We had a congressional fact-finding mission sent over last September, just because producers do take note when you're talking about things like antibiotic resistance. Denmark themselves have reported a tenfold increase in MRSA since this ban's gone into effect. They've also seen increased resistance in salmonella. And so these are some important extra factors to consider when looking at the Denmark plan, would be just that they still are experiencing those increases.
All right, and anytime we talk about antibiotics or any treatment for livestock, it's all about that livestock being comfortable and being treated humanely. Now, as pork producers, we do have the PQA. Why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. We have 10 good production practices that are highlighted in the PQA Plus program, Pork Quality Assurance Plus program. This is a voluntary program. Most people that are selling hogs today are required by the packer or the buyer to belong to this voluntary system. And those 10 production practices can include things like keeping track of what antibiotics are administered, training all staff, keeping the facilities clean. These are all things that the producer is voluntarily doing above and beyond the current regulations that they're required to follow.
All right, thank you so much again. That is Ann Miller. She's here with the Pork Producer Council, the office in Montana, as well as the office in Wyoming. And if you ever do have any questions about the pork industry, just contact one of those pork producers there in your region. With your Farm and Ranch News, I'm Haylie Shipp.